welcome, Barbara.
Awesome. Thank you, Arlen. You're so validating from the get-go here. So I'm so happy to start off on such a positive note. Thank you everyone for joining us. I am Barbara Applebaum. I'm really excited to be here with you and even more appreciative of your time. You'll hear in my intro, but I come from the world of education. So I know what it is like 3 o'clock on a Tuesday in September. And so really appreciate you taking the time and prioritizing this for your communities. We are going to talk about resilience and technology leading through change today. It is no surprise to anyone here that education has always required us to be adaptable. And that is being tested even more now that we have things like AI and just a lot of current events and things that are happening very quickly. And so we want to make sure that we're ahead of the curve on those evolving digital landscapes. So what we're going to do today is dive in and really think about how can we be resilient? How can we be a constant while also being willing to change and keep up with those times that are happening and changing at that rapid pace. We're going to start with just some introductions. Thank you all for putting who you are in the chat. So happy to see so many people from Illinois, but also our out-of-staters, Minnesota. I think I saw Alaska in there. A little bit about me. I am coming to you live from outside Detroit, Michigan. So also in the Midwest. Like I said, I was a middle school teacher for 10 years and then a middle school division head for 5 years. 10 of those were in Chicago. So all of you Illinois people, I lived in Chicago. My husband is from the Aurora, Oswego area. So familiar with your area as well. And really have loved making the transition from my school leadership into supporting schools and communities at the Social Institute. This work continues to get more and more important to me every day because I also have a 4- and 7-year-old who I swear were born knowing how to scroll through my phone and take pictures and all of those things. And so I'm even more invested in making sure that not only are we educating our young people, but also continuing to make schools really resilient and adaptable to change. So here is what we are going to look at today. We are going to do just a couple more introductions, tell you a little bit about who we are and what informs what we're doing at the Social Institute. We also then always frame what we're doing around the latest trends. So looking at then to now, how education has evolved and where we're at. We're then going to touch on what we call 3 truths. So core leadership principles for leading through tech change. I'm going to give you some examples of some hands-on exercises that I'll show you what they look like. It's a little bit hard because I'm not in a room with you, but it'll show you really good examples of how to apply these concepts. And then you will never attend a Social Institute webinar without having some great resources to walk away with. So you'll be able to scan some QR codes, walk away with some really great things to use immediately. And we will also make sure that you can access those afterwards. So by the time we're done today, around 4 o'clock, we want you to be walking away not only with a better understanding and maybe some, research and education that you didn't know before, but also really practical strategies that you can apply immediately to strengthen your school's approach to tech. So we'll dive in. I want to introduce we call them student ambassadors, but everything we do at the Social Institute is co-created with students, and that's really unique to who we are. So while you are hearing me speak today, and my colleague Savannah is here as well, really all these students are in the room as well. We meet with them about twice a month in the evenings. They tell us the latest trends, what's challenging for them, where they're spending time online, what they're doing. And that way our content remains really relevant and engaging, not only to adults, but to students who are at the core of what we do. So to start us off, I'd love for you to throw into the chat, how long have you all been in education? So you heard from me, I was in education for about 15 years before transitioning to this role. Go ahead and throw into the chat, how long have you been in education? I see 23 years, 18 years. So we've got some people who have been here 30 years. Wow, I'm always so impressed. 32, So that's a long time, which is perfect, because what I'd also like you to put in the chat is, what's been the biggest change that you've seen in technology since you started? So think about when you started 17, 32, 18 years ago, and to now, what are some of those things that you've really had to shift and adapt to, that you've seen change in technology? So you could think about, the rise of social media, maybe one-to-one devices. That was something even I saw a huge shift in when I was teaching. And then, of course, all of us were teaching during the pandemic. So hybrid learning. So go ahead and pop into the chat. What are some of those big things, that you've had to shift and really think about? Access to technology, I'm seeing accessibility that our students have to curriculum. Yep, that constant access to the internet, 24/7 connectivity. Clearly, there's a theme here. Perfect. Yeah. So we are seeing similar things. Obviously, all of us have had to shift, to a lot of that. Some of the things that I don't, safety and security, that's one I was going to mention. That's been a huge one, especially with the rise of AI, which we'll talk about today. And then also, I think, having been a division head and assistant principal, that email communication was a huge one as well. I think we relied on it, and then the pendulum swung back often when we realized sometimes, you really just needed, a face-to-face conversation or a phone conversation. So knowing that we've had to make those shifts and we've all experienced them, we want to think about, what are the trends that we need to know about, and what are the trends that we're really thinking about right now that we want to make sure that we're addressing. And so we often frame what we're talking about in this idea that it's not just a conversation that we're having as this group of people or in a classroom, but it's a much bigger conversation. So we have our large data set that's framing how we think of, all of these different technological changes. We know that teens are asking for media literacy. They want to learn life skills for modern day. Oftentimes, both teens and adults will share that these modern life skills or life skills, are just as important, if not more important, than content area skills as well. We also know that at this point, only 31% of public schools have written policies for students' AI use. I met with a school today that said, we have an AI policy, but it just says, like, use it well, which is great. There's something there. But we know that oftentimes schools, we want to put a lot of good thought into these things, but then also we want to make sure that we're doing it in a timely manner. And then as of April 1st, 2025, 17 states had enacted laws or policies on K-12 classroom or school cell phone usage. Many of you are familiar with this. We're seeing more and more of those bans across the nation on cell phones in school. And it doesn't need to be a good or a bad thing. A lot of schools see success with this, but it's all around the education, around, why do we have these bans? Why are we learning to manage our devices? And we often say, you don't hand over the keys to a car without driver's ed. And that's similarly how we think about things like cell phones, social media, AI, right? We want students to be using them well. We know that they're going to be using them, or they already are. And we want to make sure that they're doing that in a way that has positive outcomes on their future health, happiness, and success. And we also know that challenges are abundant right now, right? In the classroom and out of the classroom. We know that we're dealing with a ton of misinformation. And so helping students understand, how do they notice when they're, getting misinformation, whether it's from a news source or from their feed, which is often where they're turning for these information. ChatGPT is giving them false information sometimes. And so teaching them about how to recognize this, how to understand bias, how to understand, even just to know that they can't take the information that they're given and either use it as their own or use it without fact checking it. And then you've got the flip side, right? We know that there's been issues, with schools or even universities falsely accusing students of using AI when it was not, because the detectors, were incorrect. So to prepare for these challenges and the future of these challenges, we really want to think about the trends and how we're going to address them. We know that data privacy and equitable access to technology remain really critical, right? And of course, we've got that ongoing debate over phone use in classrooms. And so, how do we balance that push pull of we want to teach students how to use this? We know they have access to it, and yet we don't want them to have it all the time to the point of distraction. We also know, there we go, that we have to evolve, right? So if I think about 10, 15 years ago, there was a lot of hullabaloo around like listening to music in the classroom, right? Kids having their iPods and things like that, and whether it was allowed or not allowed. And some teachers made one rule and other teachers made another rule. And then that led into the phones. And so that causes a lot of confusion and then miscommunications. And so we want to make sure that we're also being really clear and we understand what are the challenges and how do we address them. And also that is going to change over time, right? So we know that as soon as we sort of get a handle on something, it's going to change and we need to adapt. So I'd love for you all to throw into the chat, which one of these trends that you're seeing have you experienced the most at your school? Or maybe is one that you're looking to address the most this year? Is it this misinformation that you're hearing from students? Is it that you've got teachers who are really hesitant to even dive into AI? Would love to hear from you all. What are the ones that seem most close to home, either that I've put up here or that you have on your own mind that isn't up here? I'm seeing evolving role of educators, AI and academic integrity. That one is huge. We've done a ton of work on that. And being able to see your perspectives and thinking, what's top of mind for you, no matter where your school falls on these issues, the core challenge remains the same, right? How do we lead through these changes without letting them overwhelm us? And I think especially given, this past week or two, it's very easy to feel overwhelmed. And so we really want to support you all in giving you resources, helping you understand, and feeling like you have a clear path of directions to take. Okay, so we're going to move into the 3 truths, which is all about resilient leaderships. Resilient leadership. You don't want to feel stuck where you are, because you always want to be able to move forward with the tech that's going to continue to change, right? We know it's not going to slow down. It's only moving faster. AI, social media, these new tools continue to emerge even within themselves, right? We just heard about the new homework help piece of AI that is already adapting to this idea that students are going to lose all critical thinking to be able to help them critically think while still using AI. So how do we prepare our students for a future that we can't even predict? I think about this all the time with my own kids. Like, they're going to go into a job force that looks nothing like anything probably I could even predict. And so that gift of adaptability is huge. We're not trying to create perfection, right? Like I said, we're not trying to put something that's going to be concrete and never change. We want to be able to zig, zag, whatever that looks like, so that we have fluidity based on what our students are experiencing and what's changing in the world around us. Truth number 2 is thinking about the fact that the characteristics of what makes a great leader hasn't changed, right? And we were just talking about clarity. That clarity piece is huge. People cannot follow the right path if they don't know what that is. And so we want to make sure that whatever clarity looks like to your community, right? What I'm hearing a lot from school leaders right now is that they don't want to make top-down decisions, which we love. They want input from all of their different key stakeholders, from their students, from their teachers, from their interventionists, and from their parents. And not everyone in that group needs to be a tech expert. You just need to hear what they're saying, take their experiences, and then we need to be willing to ask the right questions and create clear, structured policies that empower all those different groups, and they understand not only the policy, but the why behind it, which is huge. And then truth number 3 We also know the most successful schools don't just set rules. They create that shared understanding, in this case, of technology's role in learning. So not only do we want the policies to be clear, but we also want them to be consistent, right? And we want them to always sort of be revised so that everyone is understanding, okay, our community is keeping up with what's happening in the world, they're responding to it, and then they're moving on it. So we need to make sure not only that we understand the why, they're clear, and then they're consistent, but also that we're communicating them. So we're going to do a little bit of work on this in the later part of the presentation, but we want to make sure that we foster a culture of responsibility and engagement. And in order to do that, you have to communicate what the policies are, you know, what students should and should not be doing after understanding their experiences. So let's look at this a little bit in real life examples and hands-on exercises. The first piece we're going to do is called the perspective exercise. So I mentioned earlier about how those unclear policies and inconsistent ones can lead to frustration on student, families, and educators' parts. I am certain, especially with the number of years in education on the Zoom, that you all have experienced frustration due to unclear policies, even from yourself to like a district level policy, or you've been hearing it from parents or teachers. And AI is a perfect example of this. Schools are facing really challenging decisions about AI use in schoolwork and how we communicate these decisions and how we change them. And it can really make or break how they're received. So in this activity, we are going to put ourselves in the shoes of a school leader, so many of you, drafting a policy announcement, which you all know, or at least in my experience, takes a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of work. So what I'd love you to do is go ahead and take a look at this email. I'll read just a couple parts of it. I'm not going to read through the whole thing, but you'll see it's a pretty typical email. Dear families, as new technologies like artificial intelligence become more integrated into daily life, we're committed to helping students navigate them in positive, responsible ways. At our school, we're taking a proactive approach to ensure AI enhances, not replaces, the learning experience. With that in mind, we've established key principles to guide how AI is used in our classrooms. And then they've got those key principles. And then they also talk about the age restrictions on each of the AI platforms. And then they talk a little bit about how their mission remains to provide a quality education that prepares students for the future. So then what I want us to think about is how could we make this more clear and more reassuring? So I know it's probably small on your screen, but would love, if possible, if you could throw into the chat, how could you make this more clear? What questions do you feel like it brings up? What holes does it bring up? How would you maybe revise pieces of it? Anyone have any feedback that they would give if this was the letter that was drafted in their community, or maybe they received it, you know, as a parent or as an educator, that we could clarify and really work on that goal of making it clearer and more consistent so that everybody understands not only the policy, but the why behind it. So if you've got any ideas, throw those into the chat, and then I'm going to give it just a couple seconds and we'll move forward and give some examples of what that could look like. Starting with a definition of AI. I love that. I just did a presentation yesterday where that was the whole goal, was defining AI and AI literacy. Families will want to know how they're protecting their data along with using it and what are the benefits. Absolutely. Data protection is huge. Okay. So as you're putting your thoughts into the chat, we actually took this a step further and practiced using AI ourselves. So we took this same email, shared it with ChatGPT, asked it to analyze it from a parent's perspective and identify potential questions, gaps, and concerns. And what it generated was actually a pretty insightful list. So right away, you'll see it jumps in with clarity concerns. So this is us actually putting it into ChatGPT and asking it to tell us what we may have missed and how we can make it more clear. And then you'll see it pull up And we have a whole document actually on prompts, which we can share as well to get the best results from AI and from ChatGPT. But you'll see it actually is pretty comprehensive of what it comes up with. So, how will teachers be trained? What regulations does the school follow for data and privacy, right? There's that data privacy piece. What does growth mindset mean in relation to AI and literacy? And then it also moves into practical implementation concerns, which is exactly what you all were bringing up also. How will this affect grading and assessment? Will students be required to use AI? Which tools are you using? Is it the same for all ages? And how are we going to prevent misinformation? And then it continues even on to do parent involvement and consent. Are they signing this? Do they have a say in how they're shaping this policy? Can you opt out? And then one big area it flagged was tone and framing. It picked up on that exact thing that someone mentioned, which was the lack of reassurance. This ChatGPT said screen time concerns, and that it reads as though AI adoption is inevitable, rather something that the school is navigating thoughtfully. So then we took it one step further. We asked, how can we rewrite the message to, answer those concerns, reassure families, and create clarity? And we won't read the whole email. And of course, the school would probably want it to be a little bit shorter. But it does take those concerns into account. It makes it more transparent, more concise, and more aligned with sort of the goals of making the policy clear and helping parents feel understood. So just like we would teach our students, we wouldn't take this and send it out as our own, but we can use it as a thought partner to really help us think through multiple perspectives and ensure we're addressing those key concerns and key questions that might arise before we even draft the final letter that we're going to send home, which can not only be a great thought partner, but also save us time, right? So we don't have to go through maybe a process that we would have used in the past, or hopefully not get a ton of parent emails back that then we have to sort of be responsive versus proactive. I see Adam said he did a one-pager parent FAQ, which is great. Adam, I'm curious, just for my own knowledge, did you use AI at all when you were thinking and creating that? I'd be interested to know. So based on that sort of activity that we just went through, and you could use this, in your own work or with your colleagues, but what we see is that the impact of unclear policies can really lead to unintended consequences. So students may, make mistakes or violate a policy that they didn't even realize they were committing. They might have missed opportunities for responsible tech use, and then frustration that they just didn't know. And then you may have frustration from families, even from teachers, if they're not clear on the policy. So, we can all think about examples of how many times have we seen students get caught in gray areas just because they weren't sure of what exactly was allowed. And I think obviously sometimes students are pushing a boundary, but that's what students are supposed to do. And so creating clear boundaries and clear expectations is really important. Okay, so if we assume, as I believe we all do as educators, that students want to do the right thing, but they need policies that they can actually understand and follow, how do we do that? We want to make sure we're using simple, clear language, not education jargon, which sometimes gets very hard for us educators to not do. Legal terminology, I think right now that's a big one, especially with the data and privacy piece. So we want to put it into a language that our students and families can understand, and really just make sure that it's straightforward expectations that they can remember and apply. It's also really important, and this will not be a surprise to any of you as educators, that we want to show real world examples of how this policy looks and feels in their everyday life. So an example might be AI must be used responsibly, right? That sounds familiar, but doesn't actually say much. But we could say you can use AI to brainstorm ideas, but all work must be your own. Today, I talked to a school who said, anytime students use AI, which they are allowed to, they have to note it somewhere on their work. So being really clear about that is really important, and really walking through that with the students. I think about it a lot where when I was being trained by a mentor, they said, you can't tell a kid to act appropriately. They have no idea what appropriately means. You have to actually give examples. And this is very similar. And then, of course, you have to be consistent. If you have one teacher who's allowing AI and another teacher who says, no AI allowed, or you have one teacher who says you can use AI for a research paper, but you can't use AI when you're just, writing topic sentences, that gets really confusing and really hard for students to go from class to class or teacher to teacher with different expectations. So really understanding, where does the school stand? What are those expectations, and have them across the board is really helpful. Okay, time for a next little activity. This is called the misinformation exercise, and we're going to kick it off with ChatGPT again. So we asked ChatGPT to show us an example or a photo of a school leader. Pretty vague. And this is what we got. You can see that it's really us using it by the pop-ups that come up. Okay. I don't know that anyone would be surprised by this. There's our school leader, white male. And then it asks, what kind of adjustments do you want? So we said, make them more school leadery. Very, professional language here. But we're just kind of seeing what happens. So what happens when we ask it to make it more school leadery? Okay. What do you notice? Quick, put it in the chat. Any things that you notice right away before we move on? What made this school leader even more school leadery? You all might be getting a snack. No tie. We've got students behind him, his beard, the clipboard. Yep. School leaders must walk around with clipboards a lot. Yes. In reality, we know, as I'm sure, I can't see you all, but I assume you are incredibly diverse, just like the students we serve. And yet AI does not really reflect that reality. Yes, someone is said it, just, I can't see the name, said in the chat, make it show more diversity. Exactly. So what you're seeing is that AI already has existing bias within society. And while this may seem like a relatively harmless example, it's a really good example of a much bigger issue, right? If you're asking for other things, or if you're using AI all the time, then it's really going to cause you to have a certain perspective on the world. So you've probably noticed at this point, we have a theme. We keep taking things a step further, but that's what we want to do. We want to make sure that we continue to explore. So we know that misinformation relative, or related to bias, ethics, and just the digital world in general is everywhere right now. So we've seen students and adults fall completely for false information about major events. The wildfires in Los Angeles, we know that misinformation spread so quickly and so far and wide that it actually impacted first responders' ability to respond in the way that they would want to and could make the most impact. We also know that 40% of students are aware that deepfakes are being shared in schools. We have an actual lesson on this because last year we heard from schools that this was something that was so rampant, especially with older students, that they needed to be having regular conversations and not just addressing specific issue after specific issue. So we know that it's really easy for deep fake videos or photos to be created now. AI generated photos based on taking someone's face and putting a different body. We know that there were scams happening where they would take someone's voice and use that to call a loved one, things like that. So it could be as small as, using a parent's voice to get out of class, to then the scams where it sounds like a child calling their parent after a car accident needing money. So these are things that we want to make sure our communities are aware of and how to spot them and navigate them. And then, of course, that last one from the New York Post, We know that students have used AI to generate fake historical events or misrepresent scientific data in their assignments. They've created fake TikTok accounts. There's just a lot of different, really comprehensive ways that we are seeing misinformation in our schools and in the bigger communities that we live in and in the country. So how do we combat this? Which is a huge question right now that we are working a lot on, both with our adults, so our teachers and families, and with our students. One is providing teachers with professional development on AI. The reality is many educators weren't trained on AI literacy. We're still, defining what AI literacy is, and some are uncomfortable with it. It may be fear, it may just be that they don't know enough. And so we can't expect our teachers to help students navigate misinformation without first helping them feel confident around AI with bias, fact checking, protecting student data and privacy, and things like that. So the other thing that we are really talking to schools about is investing in that professional development for teachers, and really starting with getting everyone on the same page, right? What is AI? Oftentimes I ask people, what AI are you using? And immediately people think ChatGPT or Gemini, things like that, but they don't even realize they're using Grammarly, to check their emails. They're having Spotify recommend songs. They're getting shows recommended to them on Netflix. They're using Alexa for everything. And all of that is AI. So really understanding what does it look like both in the classroom, but also in our everyday lives. And then also helping our educators then champion AI literacy with students. We know that once teachers feel equipped on any subject, that they can really work to empower students. And that is more important than ever with AI, because you really want students to have those critical thinking skills when working with AI and that AI generated content. And that, goes from analyzing search results to identifying the bias that we just talked about with the school leader. And you can take that proactive approach, again, instead of just responding to issues, having these conversations on a regular basis so that it's just part of your school culture and really part of the common language. And so that really leads us to something that we say all the time. It's fundamental truth here at TSI, which is that students can't be what they can't see. And so if we want them to be critical thinkers, if we want them to be harnessing tech and AI for their benefit, we need to support our teachers in doing the same and modeling that for our students. Okay, so this brings us to our last activity, and I'm keeping an eye on the time. We are perfectly on time, which is the policy challenge. So this sort of brings together everything that we've been exploring and thinking about how are we approaching AI, phone use, misinformation, and what are the different sort of ways that schools are doing that? And maybe what's a better way that you could start to think about. We know there's no one size fits all approach when it comes to tech in schools. Every school, every district is so different. I work with schools that are teeny tiny, 50-person small independent schools, to we have one of the largest districts in New York City and everything in between. So what works for one district or community is not going to work for the other. And we know that. What we also know is you have to have a path that creates communication between all your key stakeholders, and then a clear policy that is also clearly communicated. So to frame this conversation, we use a model that might be familiar, this theory of parenting, which if you haven't seen this exact graphic, I'm sure you've seen something like it, especially if you are a parent with social media. I think these words are often in our feed. So originally it was designed for parenting style, but it matches out distinct approaches that we can also use to think about when we're talking about AI and policies around phone use and tech use. So we're going to dig into all four of these and break it down and start to think about, as I'm doing that, where do you sort of see yourself? Where do you see your policies? Where do you see your school and district as we're thinking about these different approaches? So we've got permissive, which is on that top left. This is like a hands-off approach. Rules are vague, rarely enforced, or they're not even there. Maybe they will be eventually, or maybe that's not even a goal. We have authoritarian, which is at that bottom right. I think that one is pretty self-explanatory. It's the opposite extreme: strict rules, heavy punishment, very little discussion or input. And while this structure we know has important elements to it, it often backfires because students don't understand the why behind the rules. And we know that if we just tell students what not to do over and over again, they end up doing it anyway or not listening. We have neglectful, which is that bottom left, which is not only similar to permissive, which is, little structure, little rules, but it's also very uninvolved, no communication. And then authoritative, which is top right. And this is where the research shows the best outcomes, both in parenting and in education. This solves problems with students rather than for or against them, which I'm sure you've all experienced when you're able to actually have a conversation with students, understand their experiences, and then move forward. That is much more impactful. You also set clear expectations while allowing room for adaptation down the line. You don't change your expectations for every situation, but as we know, especially with AI, they're going to have to change over time. And the goal is to really encourage responsibility and build trust, which we then know leads to success. So, why do we go over all of these and what's critical? It's really important that schools think about this authoritative approach where tech policies are clear, they're consistent, they're co-created with student input, possibly parent input, definitely teachers. And then you're able to see the results, often higher academic performance, stronger emotional intelligence, and better digital citizenship, which is often what schools are looking for in the big picture. So this is the sweet spot where students understand the rules, they feel respected, they're more likely to follow them. And that's part of why, you saw that slide in the beginning of our student ambassadors. It's really important to us that it's not just a group of adults guessing based on their own experiences what's going to be best. We want input from those students. That is not to say that the students are the experts and are going to make all the rules themselves. We also know their brains aren't fully developed, and that they don't have as much lived experience and academic experience. But allowing them that buy-in really leads to success to then build those policies and make sure they understand why they're being built. So here's the tech integration model modeled after the model that you just saw that was built for parenting. So in these tech integration model, you see that you've got regulation and learning integration, and then 4 different squares. And we've sort of taken each square and adapted it to mimic what we saw in the parenting model. So you've got the minimal tech use, where tech is used very rarely, if at all. Devices are heavily restricted. They are either banned or put away, and students are not using them at all. This approach is obviously going to limit distractions, but it also limits opportunities for students to develop essential skills that they need. That's not to say that the tech use has to be on a phone. You can have phones away and have students using computers or tablets. But we know that the world students are living in, number one, outside the school doors, and then number two, definitely in high school internships, jobs, and in college, they are going to need the digital literacy skills that they hopefully will learn in school leading up to that. And if you restrict all tech, that's not going to happen to them. Structured use, which may sound similar, is actually very different. So here, technology is used primarily for learning, but with strict rules around non-academic use, right? So this looks more like phones go away so that we're not on Snapchat, we're not on TikTok, but we're using our Chromebook, to learn those digital literacy skills, to master our Google Suite apps and things like that. So you want to make sure that they're using it, but you also want to make sure that the rules aren't too rigid. If we really protect it so much that they can't even access the tools that they need, then we get into, again, leaning into that minimal tech consequences where they're not learning how to use it and they're actually missing out on real world examples. So open use, on the other hand, allows for limited tech with educational purposes while being more flexible on those device policies. But again, if policies aren't clearly defined, then you can run into those unintended consequences. And then integrated and open. This is where technology is fully embedded into learning and students have structured flexibility in using tech responsibly. So schools in this quadrant are typically focusing on teaching digital responsibility alongside tech integration and giving students the tools that they need to self-regulate while maintaining engagement. So you've got those 4 different approaches. We like to think about what are the pros and cons of each. You know, we talked about structured use can be really helpful for keeping students focused while also using tech, but you can sometimes veer into missing out on some of those real world learning experiences. Same with integrated and open. This is really great as long as the policies are clear and you don't have those unintended consequences of maybe students being on tech too much. I'm curious for you all to maybe throw into the chat, where do you think your school or your district is on this quadrant? Are you in the minimal tech mode? Are you integrated and open? You could also put, where would you ideally be? And what challenges do you think maybe stand in your way? I think, you know, especially in schools, it takes a long time to change, especially if you are including the experience from all of those different stakeholders. And so sometimes, even if your goal is maybe more integrated and open or more structured use, but you're still living in the minimal tech or the open use, that's definitely a reality for a lot of schools. So I'm curious if anyone's willing to pop that into the chat. Where are you in this sort of quadrant? Jill just said she's more on the left. And you could also share, where do you want to be? Maybe, you know, you're here to learn more about or have your school or district lean more, you know, into a different quadrant. But it's really interesting, I think, to reflect on this and really think about where are we and where do we want to be? And it's just another way of thinking about the different ways that we're integrating or not integrating tech, AI, social media, and all the skills we need into the process that we have. Yeah, Stacy, good reflection tool. That was a much more succinct way to say what I was trying to say. That's exactly right. It's a great reflection tool. Okay. So we've covered effective tech policies and thinking about that consistency. It's not about locking rules in forever. We are continuously adapting to a world that refuses to stand still, right? It's a continuous cycle, staying ahead of trends and then reviewing and reflecting, so on and so forth. And we know that for today's purposes, we're talking about AI, but this is applicable to everything. You know, I worked a lot on curriculum and also on student behavior, and those are the same thing. You have to constantly be adapting to that ever-changing world. And so we know that schools thrive through change when they're not just reacting, they're having these proactive conversations and staying ahead of the trends. You want to review and adapt. You want to listen to students and teachers to ensure that the policies work in practice and it's not just theoretical. And then you're staying on top of those trends. And so that's what really comes down to resilient leadership, is that adaptability to stay, that ability to stay flexible and adapt to change, which then allows you to really empower students and educators to navigate, again, things like AI, but it could be anything. And I think the more we can do that, and you all are showing that, you know, you're doing it by being here, the better our communities are going to be, for sure. So that's kind of our reflection end of information giving and hands-on activities. As I promised, we are going to do our final takeaways and give you all some resources to walk away with. So I would love to know, before I have you scan a bunch of QR codes and walk away with some really great resources, what is one small action that you could take even this week, in the next 3 days, to lead through today's tech challenges. And it could be something that we've talked about, and it could be something that maybe you were already thinking about, that it wasn't specific, to what I said, but would love to see some sort of mini goals of something you can do in the next couple of days, the next couple of weeks, to really think about you becoming a resilient leader in today's tech world. And we do have some fellow educators and school leaders who gave us some ideas. So thinking about even just maybe asking your colleagues or your teachers about the support they need around AI, thinking about a tech tool that maybe you could start introducing, drafting survey for AI, on AI for parents, great idea. Communicating more about AI work, love that. Quick survey at PTC, yes. This is amazing. I love this. And hopefully some of the resources I'm going to share right now could even help you all in these tasks. So I'm going to start to share some resources. Again, they're all going to have QR codes, but we will also ensure that you all have access to these. We'll share them with Arlen and make sure that you can get them if you don't have your phone right next to you, or you don't have time to scan all the QR codes. But a couple of things for you to walk away with. First is the 2025 Student Insights Report. You saw this in one of those very first slides about the trends. We have the great gift of a lot of data, anonymous data from students. And so this is going to just be a great glimpse into where are students spending their time online? What are they doing? What do we need to know? And it's one of the largest surveys of its kind. So that'll be great data for you to dive into. Here's what I was saying for those of you thinking about your AI policies. Here is a school playbook on creating clear AI policies. So thinking about alignment, how to equip students, how to shape those tech policies. We have a lot of great tips here for you and things to think about. So that is a great resource, especially with some of those goals that you all made and put into the chat there. I see that Savannah's also popping these into the chat if that's easier for you all as well. Here's our classroom tech policy document. This is great to do with your students or to share with your faculty. Just a really clear document on thinking about what are we doing, what are the boundaries, and talking to students about it. You see up at the top here, these are our 7 standards that we organize all of our content by that really reflect our goals with the schools we're working with. And then how to empower students to play to their core as they navigate AI. This is another playbook. It's got some great data in there on how students are approaching AI and just a great another set of tips for educators. And then this one plays back to deepfakes. So we were talking about that misinformation and the AI deepfakes. This is a free resource just to have more understanding of what that looks like. It's also got some positives and negatives around AI, which I think is really helpful in having those conversations with adults who are often, either far to one side of the negative or far to one side of the positive, understanding that, again, it's not black and white, good or bad. It's just making sure we understand how to use it really well. And then this is your most important QR code of the day. We thrive on feedback. We want to hear from you. So please scan this QR code. It's going to ask you a couple questions. You're also going to be entered to win our Yeti tumbler. Usually I have it next to me on my desk, but I don't have it, or Apple AirPods. Please, please, please definitely give us the feedback. It will also ask if you want to be connected. We are happy to meet outside of this Zoom, learn a little bit more about your school, answer any questions, tell you a little bit more about what we do. So definitely make sure you fill out this survey. Savannah just put that one in the chat as well. And then last but not least, this is my favorite resource that the Social Institute has. It is one that educators are consistently telling me is amazing and they are so grateful for. This is the huddle. It's an email that we send weekly on the weekends. It has the top 3 trends that students are going to walk in talking about and discussion questions for you to engage with them. So it really is a way for you to stay ahead of the curve, understand sort of what's happening in our students' world and how we can talk to them about it. without having to do, like I like to say, that 8, 9 p.m. Evening work that educators always have to do. We take that off your plate, do it for you so you can walk in prepared to have those really good conversations. And then last but not least, of course, we are on all the social media apps. So you can go ahead and follow us. We have great little tidbits from our student ambassadors. We'll also always be posting our upcoming webinars. So you can come to those. We have complimentary webinars throughout the year for educators as well. And then you can always reach out to me directly. That is my email. Feel free to send me any questions, connect with me. Love working with educators. Really appreciate your time here today. Again, I know it is precious. I hope y'all are walking away with some great, useful information. I am happy to stick around for a couple minutes for any questions that you all have or any thoughts. But just grateful again. And then, like I said, Savannah did put all those resources in the chat, and we'll make sure you have access to those.
Wonderful. Barbara, thank you so much for your time this afternoon, sharing these wonderful insights on how to safely and effectively integrate technology into our classrooms. This has been great. And Savannah, thank you for posting those links into the chat as well, so everybody can access those from their computer or scan the QR code from their phone. Strongly encourage you to complete that evaluation that the Social Institute has put together to give them feedback. I will be following up with the ISB evaluation tomorrow when I send the recording link, so that way you can get your ISB evidence of completion form and get your PD clock hours for those of you joining us from Illinois. We've got a few minutes left before 4 o'clock, so if anybody has any questions or comments, I'm seeing lots of thank yous come in, Barbara, into the chat, so that's always great. But any final thoughts or questions from our audience here as we wrap up the webinar today?